Josh Eberly, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the Single Track podcast.
Thank you for having me. Good opportunity to share some stories and advice, maybe.
I don't want to bury the lead, which is the fact that you coach a college trail running team, and we're going to get into all the details about that. But I do think it's important to provide some backdrop for how you got into this position, your influences, your philosophies. And I was listening to a podcast you did a couple of years back, and you mentioned being on the Hanson's Brooks running team. And for any folks that aren't familiar, because this is a primarily trail running audience, can you talk about what that team is and what they do, and then maybe also talk about how that experience influenced what you're doing now at Western?
Yeah, funny that you mentioned that, because I just listened to your interview with Desi, and it was funny. I was just trying to remember. I remember I was on the team when she first came and joined the Hansons, and I was just remembering little Desi coming from Arizona, getting her feet wet, and now she's, everyone in the trail running world or road running world knows who Desi is. So it's pretty cool to see her progress through the program, but pretty neat to see those first sort of inception views of they weren't always like that. It takes hard work and many years to build the successes. And one thing I always said with my athletes, and my old coach always said that there's no such thing as overnight success. So it's funny, because all of a sudden you see someone win, and you don't see all the work they put in beforehand. So you just think, oh, they're naturally gifted. But it's really cool to have that sort of connection with Desi at the Hansons. But anyways, I had a great opportunity to join them right out of college in 2004. I actually made the senior world team for cross country in 2004, and so I went to Belgium to race World Cross. I did the 12K, and on that team there was an athlete running for the Hansons. So Kevin and Keith were actually in Belgium, and he was my roommate, Richie Brinker. And that's basically the whole introduction I had with Hansons. Kevin and Keith, they looked at the roster of All-Americans on the 12K and the 4K, because back then we had the two distances. And they said, "You're the only one not associated with the team or a sponsor." And they're scratching their head. They're like, "Would you want to come out for a visit?" And I had no clue what the Hansons really were, but that was our first introduction. And they, I flew out, I think, literally 2 weeks after Worlds, and got the whole the lowdown of where the trails were, where the track's at, the houses, all the resources, all that good stuff. And I was all in. Trying, going for it and saying, hey, this is my next step for my own personal goals, just hopefully ignite something above and beyond what I was just doing, right out of college. So great opportunity. It's amazing the time there. I was there from 2004 to 2007 for 3 years, and the friends I met, the environment that we had, you always start to think back about these great experiences. And I think it always revolves around the people that make up that are the makeup of it. And I had, a great group of athletes and friends, and still to this day, we talk a lot to the friends I made back in Michigan. But, honestly, going into it, it was different training from what I was used to in college, obviously. And I was a little hesitant on really buying into the program. But I thought to myself, and this is maybe some advice for you listeners out there, but if you're in a program, definitely buy into it 100%. If you don't, you're sort of, you know, you're not doing yourself justice. Get to another program, move to another school, and buy into that program. But I think that was one thing for myself that I had to do to really believe, okay, this is going to take time. I got to do their training, and I have to, do the group training as well with everyone. So that was a big thing, is just buying into something new and trusting that process, that there'll be ups and downs. But that's one thing I definitely learned along the way. I think the Hansons are, they're known for their marathon specific intensity in their program. So I learned so much about myself as an athlete, my limits, but more selfishly, how to correctly train for a marathon the right way, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious because it seems like your experience at Hanson's was an incredibly formative time in your running career. It left you with a lot of impressions. And I'm also curious because we don't really have this culture in the trail scene. Like, as we'll talk about later on, you're the coach of this trail running team at Western, but this model certainly doesn't exist yet in a co-located format at the pro level. What were some of the modes of being and just the benefits of being on a team that you got from Hanson's that you think can and will translate well over into the trail running world?
Yeah. I think I think the resources were number one. Back then, I'm not sure how it is now, but if you were an A athlete, you got housing paid for, health insurance, you got top priority to work at the running stores part time. So to really balance out your athlete to, financial situation, not everyone can make it in the road running circuit. So
yeah,
to have a little income, working the shoes, being in the environment, having a structured environment for training is huge. You don't really have to think about it. You meet with the coaches, everything's set up logistically, the travel, the training. You basically just have to show up and put in your work. And that's one thing that I had a lot of athletes. This is my 8th year as head trail running coach. A lot of athletes, when they graduate from 4 years of our trail running program, and that next year after they graduate, they come to me and they say, "It's so hard. It's so hard. You made it so easy. You just showed up, and we traveled to races, and logistics were taken care of, food, all that stuff." So, obviously, any kind of program or group program like that's number one. You just have to sort of show up and buy into it. But the stuff I learned was just that. I think the Hansons, they sort of doubled down on specificity for sure. And that's one thing I took in my own sort of realm, selfishly, about, hey, these guys have something right. The knowledge of what terrain or course you're training for, the paces for the marathon. It's really calculated how they come up with these segments of training. So I try to really reproduce a lot of that stuff in my own, not to the extreme of what Kevin and Keith do, but I will get into it more later for my philosophies and stuff. But again, like when we were at Hanson's, we used to go to Florida for the winter, whatever that looked like, 3 to 4 weeks, 5 weeks to go to Florida, getting some good, because in Michigan, it's snow on the ground. You can't really adapt to any kind of heat adaptation. What else? Boulder. We went to Boulder right before U.S. cross country champs. We were there for 2 or 3 weeks beforehand. So a lot of that, normal sort of group adaptation for climates and whatnot that we hit. If you train for like a marathon like Boston, they really reproduce all the training grounds to mimic Boston as close as you can.
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff I sort of just really absorbed as an athlete and really paid attention on the success they had while doing that, because it is important to sort of mimic the profile, the distance, the heat, all the other little, variables that you have in road. But now way more variables in trail, right? We don't have just a little bit of hill. We have technical terrain, downhill running, uphill running, nutrition, like regular running, heat, salt, like you can go on and on. So it's pretty cool, but yeah.
I'm curious what you think about this. I've always wondered, because I've been shouting out this idea of trail running teams into the ether for like a year now, and I'm not sure how much of an appetite there is at the pro level, but one of the interesting issues with this structure that I've had told to me recently is that because trail running is so climate-wise, geographically, surface-wise diverse, and the events are so diverse, that it would be hard to get like the same 7 or 8 athletes to agree to live and train in the same place and organize around the same events. Do you see that as a significant hurdle? Like when you were on Hanson's books, for example, was it easy to rally athletes around the same events and also to around the same type of training? Like, do you see any risk for breakdowns and differences there if this were to happen?
Yeah, definitely a lot of risk, but I think the reward is just that. I think with that group mentality and the other athletes on the team coming from, whatever coach or hierarchy system you have, really makes a big difference. And I never saw at Hanson's really that, that this segment, we're going to have Chicago Marathon segment, and that's like 90% of the athletes buy into that, right? Or Boston segment for the spring, 90% of athletes buy into that. So there wasn't too much conflict, on that part of it. I don't really see too much around that. That would be too risky, for me.
Well, I think to set the table for the rest of the conversation, we should introduce your current position and where you're at and what the day-to-day looks like. So maybe just for a minute here, do a little bit of an elevator pitch on your current title and how you're involved in trail running.
Yeah, well, this is my 8th year as head trail running coach at Western Colorado University, and it's under the Mountain Sports umbrella program, which is not the NCAA. It's our own unique program that we house 7 different disciplines underneath. So we have trail running, mountain biking, rock climbing, free ride, Nordic, alpine. We have those disciplines underneath our mountain sports. So I luckily got into the position. We can go down that road, I think later on, but I've basically just been almost at inception of the program. The program was only, I think, 2 or 3 years old when I came on board. And yeah, it's been a fun, wild ride of what partnerships, financial opportunities for valuing our program via university standpoint, and then the different types of teams I have year to year really keep me on my toes as a coach and keep me pretty stoked and happy that it's not the same people every year. We have a very diverse, different type of group that comes in sort of every other year. And then I sort of balance that out on those athletes that we have to correspond with training and races and whatnot. So the team and the athletes, like I said before, the environment really make a difference about paving the future for this team. So it is dynamic, right? It's not the same thing. It's not cut and dry every year like NCAA. We're going to have conference, regionals, nationals. We got this, we got these athletes. It's pretty dynamic in that sense of levels of competitions and fitness abilities too. Yeah.
Well, certainly there are listeners out there that are very familiar with you and what you do at Western. But for whatever reason, you just recently came on my radar, and I find this absolutely fascinating. And I know just from what you've described there that the program is relatively well established. It's at least 8 years old. And I guess I'm wondering, why is Western so unique? Like, why aren't there other similar programs out there? Why are you on your own island in all of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. And honestly, I think it came down to the vision of one or two guys that really created this vision that they had for mountain sports. And I think it all really started when one of our local guys, Dave Weens, he's sort of his, claim to fame was he beat Lance Armstrong, on a mountain bike race. And, he's a world, mountain biker on himself. And his wife is a world champion as well, or world medalist, I think. So he's known in the Valley as this high end athlete, mountain biker, visionist. But him and some other sort of big donors were talking one day, and they just said, how can you compete against Durango, which is Fort Lewis College, in mountain biking? And Dave Weens basically just said, we can't, because they have the opportunity to ride their bikes 12 months out of the year. We can't do that in Gunnison because we have this thing called winter, and Durango has it too, but they don't have it as harsh as us. So anyways, Dave Weens basically just said, no, yeah, we can't do this. However, what we could do is have sort of this mountain sport program where we have the mountain bikers transition into snow in the winter and keep that fitness. And then after, when the snow melts, get on their bikes and hit the dirt and keep that level of fitness high instead of taking the winter off and losing everything that you built. So that was really the inception that Dave Weens had for the program, which was really cool, because at first the early years were mountain biking, free ride, and Nordic skiing were the three disciplines. And that worked for, the first year. And then they looked at it and they said, how can we make this better? We need to double dip on what we're doing here, or ante up. And so they started adding different disciplines. So the trail running got added, the alpine got added, the ski mountaineering got added. So these, the different disciplines started adding up, and they said, this actually makes more sense now because of where we're at geographically in Colorado. We're in this valley sort of sandwiched between these two, these peaks and these mountain ranges, the West Elks, Monarch Crest, we got Taylor Canyon, Crested Butte. We have all these amazing extreme environment right out of our backyard. And for a university not to have something that those athletes can really buy into or get into other than NCAA was head scratching for like Dave Weens. So he really after that first year or two, they said this could work. And now what do we need to do now to make it better? And so then they added disciplines. They tried to add a little more private donors. And then on that third year, they really invested in, hey, we need to get high level coaches and structure on each of these teams. So they reached out to, the Rolodex that they had back then, and they connected the resources that they had and got on board what we have today every single one of our coaches on the program is a high level athlete themselves, and not just like a history teacher or a math teacher doing this just because they need to fill the void. It's very specific to the discipline. And I think that what, separates it.
Well, I got to say, one of the many things that fascinates me here is just the nature of the mountain sports program and how it encourages athletes to be multi-sport. And I'm curious if you have an opinion here, like given that you've had the chance to see these athletes develop through their 4 years at Western, do you think that they're better off switching up season by season in terms of the sport they take on, like switching from cross country in the fall to like ski-mo in the winter to maybe running again in the spring? And I'm asking this knowing that like the typical reality for a collegiate runner is to just be running throughout the calendar year, cross country, indoor, spring track. So I'm curious if you've seen any noticeable differences there in athlete development.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I've seen less of a burnout for sure when you have a winter sport to jump on. And like we said at the beginning, the NCAA, some athletes are made for that. Their whole identity sort of envelops around the NCAA for their whole career. It's funny because when you graduate 4 or 5 years from that university and you get asked, hey, what did you do in college? Most of those athletes say, oh, I ran, or I played football or something like that. And they usually, second tier, they always say, oh, my degree was in, graphic design or whatever. So anyways, the identity takes over their whole life in college. And so that was one thing, a lot of athletes can do that fine. They can balance the indoor track, the track, cross country. Some of them a little too much, a little too much pressure, a little too overwhelming, and you see that burnout. What's really neat about this mountain sports program is we do have that winter sport migration or transition athlete that come in the fall, hit the trails or mountain bike, and then the winter comes and then they go to free ride, or they go to ski mountaineering, or they go to Nordic or Alpine. Yeah. And that I think that's a good balance for the athlete mentally. Physically, yeah, they get burnt out, but more mentally, it's a lot of running, and then boom, the snow comes, then they get stoked for the snow. And then it's funny when March comes around and the snow melts, they get burnt out on the snow and they're like excited to get on the trail. So then they come and join us in the spring for the last few months of the spring for mountain sports. But it's pretty neat that they have that balance. And as you can see, the Europeans, they do it easily. That's one of their main things that they do in the winter. So, I would love to have all my trail athletes transition into sort of like a ski-mo sport in the winter where, hey, maybe we do 3 days of ski-mo and 3 days of running and keep the fitness sort of balanced that way. And that's just sort of been talk, just me and some athletes and some other colleagues I have. But in a perfect world, that'd be pretty cool, to do that. But I do have athletes that stick around the whole winter that we do have a good group that trains still every day, Monday through Friday, through November all the way to May, through the winter into the spring. And we change up our routine a little bit. We work on some agility stuff, some shorter stuff, and then we do take advantage of getting out of town every weekend or every month to get on some dry trails to race. But we try to keep it a little fun and not super serious on those months. I think that really helps us sort of balance out that burnout for sure. We've also done some snowshoe racing in January and February, which cool. is tough as hell. It's so tough, but it does create this like other hey, challenge of it's, hey, let's just try this. It's fun adventure, right?
That reminds me too of all those Iditarod races up in Alaska and Canada, for example. And could you convert some training for those events up there? Um, but one other thing I wanted to ask you on this topic, and for context, I'm based in Salt Lake City, live about 2 miles away from the University of Utah campus. So what you're doing at your school is very interesting to me because it doesn't exist yet at the U. Um, if you had to guess, assuming that there's just a lot of theories going around about what can and can't work, is your current best guess that the blueprint for making this intercollegiate is to introduce some sort of mountain sports program at other schools? So basically to follow your same model, or is it going to be unique?
No, I think to make it work, it'd be just that. We would have to introduce some sort of governing body with a board and bylaws and something that is top down. Because right now, what I see that's happening in the last 8 years of trail running clubs and some teams or whatever that I hear, other athletes have been reaching out to me, other coaches have, hey, how can we get this into our school and university? And they're all sort of going a different way. You know what I mean? Right. And it's great. First of all, it's great for the athletes, and that's number one, but actually for the vision of having trail running as intercollegiate activity, it's not going to work that way. So, I've had several meetings with my admin about really trying to figure out that blueprint, something to get together so we can basically hand it off to the other universities and say, hey, look at these metrics. Here's our financial plans. This is what we're spending on each sport. This is how trail running does it. This is how climbing does it. And just put everything very transparent on the financial part of it, how structured each training day is, what the university risks are, what their benefits are, and sort of what we do. And again, this is all talk, and we've had multiple meetings about trying to put together something. But again, it's a lot of work for a couple people to put together, all these stats and papers and history and numbers. But I think that's where it sort of needs to start to hand off to other universities to be successful. But yeah, wouldn't that be cool? Trail running, intercollegiate, any of these, geographically located colleges should have a trail running team, CU, CSU, Wyoming, Utah, Durango, Fort Lewis, and that's just, within our sort of four corners, and start there. And then just sort of build off of that. But that's the tough part, is coming up with something to get out there to the universities. But that's where it needs to go. Governing body, bylaws, board of directors, and really start to say, all right, universities, who wants to buy in? This is what we have to do, sort of thing.
I don't know why I'm thinking about this right now. It's a little bit philosophical, but it's amazing that for this unique 4-year period of our lives, we live in close proximity to each other. We're like in the dorms, we're on these teams, we're eating all these meals together. It's incredibly social. And then just like that, we're like thrown into this world of rugged isolation and individualism, and we're kind of on our own. And I think part of the reason why I'm excited about this conversation is just the fact that it also doesn't have to end at college, right? Like hopefully this conversation inspires brands and stores to think about how they can increase community at the competitive elite level of the sport as well. One thing where I want to take the conversation next is how you got into coaching, and particularly maybe we can start with what excites you about being a coach, and what inspired you to want to take on this role at Western?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I ever found myself, being in charge of like a trail team or NCAA team or whatever. This path for me definitely just sort of, came to me by sort of accident, and here we are today. So, even when I was younger at the Hansons and going through it, I always thought like I wanted to take control of my own coaching. I wanted to really hone in on, okay, at Hanson's, how are these guys planning training for all these athletes? How are these individual athletes responding to training? Where do the athletes come from that are responding better to the group training?
Yeah.
And in my head, not to get deep though, I really thought about that a lot. And one great thing about Hanson's was it was all, it's group training. It is absolutely group training with not a ton of individual plans or personalization. And that was one thing I said to myself, if I ever find myself in a coaching position with a group, I would love to have the bulk of it be group, but I know deep down that I need to have that personalization to, for certain athletes.
Yes.
And so, the opportunity came about when I got back from Hanson's. I hung out in Gunnison a little bit, did my own stuff. I was training myself. I've been my own coach ever since I've left Hanson's. And so I was just sort of, dabbling with running with the Western crew, the Western cross country and the track team off and on. And then I knew the head coach pretty well. So she hired me on to be assistant coach. So I was assistant coach for the NCAA program for 4 years. And that was fun. Being a mentor, talking to the kids, giving them advice, really fun. And that's really, that was a little spark in my head. Like, this is sort of neat. If you had opportunity to take over a program, you could call the shots. And, you ask any assistant coach, you had to bite your tongue quite a few times on, if I were a coach, I would do it this way, or if I was head coach, I'd do it that way. So at one level, it's great to be an assistant coach to see how stuff is run. But the other point, you're like selfishly saying, oh, I wonder if I did something different, if they would be better or worse or whatever. So anyways, after 4 years, this mountain sports thing sort of came about. And one of I didn't know him at the time that well, Duncan Callahan, which now is one of my best friends. We just actually ran together this morning. We run together all the time. He came to me and he knew I was on the fence or leaving NCAA. And I think I ran by his house one day and I saw him in his yard and he stopped me and he goes, hey, what do you think about being head coach of the trail running program? We're hiring. And I just started laughing. I'm like, yeah, no, it's not for me. And he's like, no, seriously, let's sit down tomorrow and I'll have a conversation with you. And the next day we talked for an hour. Somehow he talked me into to accepting the job. And and I was super hesitant going into it because I was like, what the hell am I doing? First of all, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know, I have 25 athletes on the team, and what am I supposed to do? And that first day, I was just sort of overwhelmed with my eyes just sort of shocked. But by the end of the week, I was all in 100%. Like, this is pretty cool. This is a good challenge for myself, coaching, to give back to the running community, and to really, teach these kids, the general fundamentals of running. That's the big part of it, that, and the structure part of sort of my sort of philosophy that I've been doubling down on from day one. So it's been a fun ride. Every year I'm definitely learning more about how to tweak stuff, how to, tweak training, logistic stuff, all that stuff, I'm constantly learning. I do learn from my mistakes when they do happen. So attention to detail, I think, is high on my priority.
Where does this fit into the rest of your lifestyle? Like, is coaching something that you do full time, or are there other things that you balance around it?
So coaching is my fun job, my out of the office job. I do coach other athletes for one of my Hanson friends, Luke Humphrey. So I coach under him, Luke Humphrey Running. So I have online athletes there, and then I have the college trail running team. But my pay the bills sort of job is my web development business, Run Sleep Design, that I've been doing for 18 years now. And so it is a good balance for office stuff and then actually outdoor rec, endorphins, get some fresh air, explore the mountains, sort of a break from the screen time and escaping that noise from reality. I think really keeps me balanced as a business person, and productive too. I couldn't, if all I'm doing is just sitting in front of the screen for 12 hours a day, I don't think I'd be that productive. But it's funny how if I go out for a run and then come back from practice, I just click and things are just naturally, way more efficient because of, I think, fitness and endorphins and fresh air, which is pretty lucky to have both of those for sure.
Right on. Well, I want to get into the nuts and bolts of the team, and I think we should start with how the team is structured and how you recruit. So can you paint a picture there of what this team looks like from a people standpoint, from an athlete standpoint?
Yeah. So for the athlete standpoint, you just, you have to be enrolled at Western. I have some graduate students because we have a graduate program at Western. So we have some, it's not all undergrad. We have some graduate students that are on the team as well. So a little older, a little more experienced, or tailored in the sport for sure. But we meet, it's basically 9 months out of the year, from the end of August to the beginning of May to the end of April, sort of our season. And then our fall season is basically, end of August to Thanksgiving. And that's our fall season. Then we have a small winter season. And then our spring season is roughly around, January to May. It's not really, the January season. February is not really spring, but I clump it in sort of our spring season because those are mostly our athletes that stick around. But day to day, it's Monday through Friday. It's 3 o'clock to 5:30, 6 o'clock, every day. On the weekends, we don't race. And in the fall, we do race a lot. I think it's important to give them opportunities for experience. And not every race we will go out and hit it really hard, but some races we take as more glorified training runs or an opportunity for these athletes to work on nutrition or uphill running or technical running, so we try to have one of those sort of goal-oriented objectives for each of those races that we're not hitting really hard. And then the other weekends that we try to get out to explore the mountains around us, like the San Juans. We did a training trip at the San Juans, Crested Butte. We hit up 401 and Gothic Mountain. So a lot of those weekends that we don't get to race, I still try to get out early on Saturday or Sunday to provide them an opportunity to get out 3-4 hours for an exploratory sort of run. Yeah. And we provide, the transportation and sort of snacks and stuff for them as well. But I think that sort of helps, a little more incentives for the athletes to show up on the weekends. As far as, I don't know how much detail you want me to get into, but as far as our weekly structure, it's very common for us to do 1 to 2 workouts a week. Sometimes we're on the Tuesday, Friday workouts. Sometimes we're just on the Wednesday workout cycle. Depends on when the races are. but I do like to throw in a lot of, like I said, general fitness. I think that's the foundation of running, whether it's ultra, trail, or mountain, or NCAA. So I do some speed work. We do some hill work. We do some form drills. We do long runs, medium long runs. So a lot of easy runs, a lot of recovery runs. We hit core twice a week. We hit the weight room twice a week. So, a lot of the other stuff, the little things that I learned along my way, I think are valuable. It's not really just about the running and the mileage and how fast you are, but really give them a good structure on, when to do what, right? And how to do it appropriately on the given time of season. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question on structure wise, but it's pretty cool. As far as athlete wise, we have all of our athletes are very similar. They want to be out in the outdoors. They love running. Some have no trail experience. Some are just off the high school cross country and track, seasons. So they have zero experience in the trail. Others are a little more tailored in the trail. So that sort of experience levels, I try to, meet up with them and we try to, introduce them appropriately into the trail running ecosystem that we have, which is neat.
Well, I have a lot of questions for you off that. I think the first is like going back to athlete recruitment. Like in your situation, given that this is a non-traditional program, it's not like this is UC Boulder or any of these major D1 programs that have these sophisticated recruiting operations. How are you finding your athletes? Like, are you walking around campus and picking people out, or are you making trips to high school events, or how does this work for you?
Yeah, good question. So we do make a poster for, the first couple of weeks usually of school, and we hang that up. So, most of our athletes have already committed before that, but you'd be surprised at the level of athletes that come to me within that first couple of weeks. Could be from 2 to 6 athletes that can come just because they saw a poster or, their friends said something. But, most of the recruiting is word of mouth. That's our part. Word of mouth, and then marketing and social media. And the other really high important one is showing up to these big races, and having that sort of team environment, and these coaches and the parents and other athletes that come up and what is this? Is this a cross country team? And so you got to, inform them. Oh no, this is the trail running program at Western. And then one thing leads to another. We see them at another race, and then they say, my cousin's daughter is good at running, but she doesn't want to do NCAA. So, makes a connection there. So that's the big part of it. For active recruiting, I do go to Colorado High School cross country state championship every October. We go there, we set up a tent, and more or less, I'm not really like handpicking the athletes. Like, I got to get the top 40. It's more or less getting the word out, talking to the coaches, making connections, talking to the parents. And I think one thing that a lot of people overlook is that the connections you make with those high school coaches are so valuable. You talk to them, and they absolutely say, hey, these 3 athletes are NCAA athletes. These other 6 athletes, they absolutely love running, but they don't want anything to do with NCAA. So having that, always be informed with that, with the coaches and parents, creates just like this stimulus in my head where I'm like, we need more of this for, the alternative to running in college. And that alternative to NCAA especially really gets me excited, because I've seen so much progress and success that these athletes just having that safe environment for trail their trail running team or mountain sports team helps them get through college. You know, being an NCAA athlete myself, if it wasn't for NCAA, I probably wouldn't be where I am today because they helped me throughout, right? They helped me. That's who you hung out with. You know, that's what you hung out with on the weekends. You traveled with them a lot, and they sort of made you, right? So having that little club, that exclusive club to be a part of really helps that balance of it's not, I'm not here just all for school, but this is another like outlet for them to breathe a little bit and be themselves, which is really neat.
Do you ever envision a time in the future where you're out recruiting for athletes for your program and you're finding that the default opinion of these athletes is to go and participate in a trail running program versus these standard cross country, indoor track programs?
Yeah, I think that would be pretty cool. You know, it's, I guess you have to be in the right place, you know, at the right time to have that, you know, have that sort of conversation. But
I know it's a little pie in the sky, but it's, I mean, to me, trail running is so much more, I mean, I'm so biased, obviously, but trail running is so much more compelling than other forms of running. So that's why I ask.
Yeah, no, and it's cool because it's funny you say that because I was thinking the same thing. Our first year, we set up our mountain sports tent at the high school cross country championship. And I was thinking to myself, why am I here? I'm not going to be actively recruiting. How can I make this more engaging? And so what we did, we brought this like big screen TV and we showed on repeat like this video that one of our athletes made of one of our races. And it was really cool. Like, you know, it was big mountain climbs and, you know, everyone having fun. And, you know, it wasn't just like, you know, here's the list of how fast all of our athletes run. It's about like, you know, we go to these really fun events. We have a good time. We bag the peaks. We get fit. And we're competitive and have our own success. So showing that to these athletes, some of the high schoolers came up and they were just like dumbfounded on something out there that is available to you know the next gen for a college opportunity. And some bite on it and some don't. But I think to your point, yeah, the true vision of it is just that. It's such a fun time. Like we just got back from Flagstaff just on Sunday night, and we were there for, you know, 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But you know, just being there in that Golden Trail Series competition, you know, the area, it was just so cool to see, you know, all of our athletes, you know, be inspired, whether it was because of the other athletes there or because of the mountains or the course or the terrain or the distance that they had. You know, pretty gnarly race for the 12K and the 26K. But I think that's cool. It's not just a track, right? It's not just a golf course. It's, you know, the course is so challenging. I think that creates a huge incentive for people to jump on board for these trail races. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, yeah, without a doubt in my mind, we have set and setting and overall storytelling on our side. I've told this short story on the podcast before, but I had a guest on, and I don't know why I'm forgetting their name, but they told me that maybe 10 or 15 years ago, they were at the running event down in Austin, Texas, and they were walking past the Brooks table, and Brian Sell, one of the best American marathoners of all time, and Scott Jurek were sitting side by side doing autographs. And everybody wanted Scott's autograph. Everybody recognized Scott, but he's like a 2:45 marathoner, and there's Brian Sell, who's like 2:10, like by all standards, just like a better pure runner. But like everybody recognized Scott. And that to me is like so indicative of the potential of trail running and just how that arena is from a fan standpoint more compelling.
Oh my gosh, Finn, I can't believe you just told me that story because, you know, Brian, where I met at Hanson's, he's one of my best friends. We hung out with him in Breckenridge this last summer, just, you know, 4 months ago. at dinner, he told me that exact story.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And it was funny coming from Brian. He's just like, really? I'm this Olympian.
And Brian's amazing. Brian, one of the best.
Yeah, I'm an Olympic American marathoner, and people are going to. Yeah, it was funny. It was awesome. But you're so right.
That's hilarious. Well, anyways, one other thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that going to events is one of the most important things your team can do from a marketability standpoint. I'm curious, what do you prioritize, like in the fall and the spring seasons? Like where can listeners see your team competing?
Yeah. So the fall, our big one is we do a lot of local stuff, CB Ultras, Sage Burner. We do, every other year we sort of do Flagstaff. This year we did Flagstaff. We also did Aspen Golden Leaf half marathon a couple weeks ago. What we got? Yeah, then we got some local ones left. But my big events for the fall are always surrounded by the Moab Trail and Half Marathon in November 5th this year. So that's our big one for our half marathoners to marathoners. And then 2 weeks later is Dead Horse, and that will help satisfy my longer crew who needs an ultra, a 50K or 50 miler. And right now we're sticking with Dead Horse just because of Mad Moose runs a great events. They run great events. They work with us well. We know the course. It's 4 hours away, so it's pretty convenient for us to get some good, data points for us. But I will say I love that marathon, the trail marathon, especially in Moab, because that is sort of like the true definition of trail running in general. That race in itself throws absolutely every type of terrain at you. A little road running, sand running, uphill running, technical running, downhill running. They have an obstacle course sort of at the end where you're climbing ropes and whatnot. So it's not just that one sort of, out and back on a dirt road and, all the fast people, really come out the other end, successfully. It's really challenging for me to come up with a good strategy on how to time all of my workouts for the seasons to have the athletes build up and hit that very successfully. So stuff that I learned from Hanson's and whatnot, to be specific as I can to the course, I try to come up with good specific workouts that will help them through Moab Marathon. And then we work on nutrition and, we work on a little downhill stuff at times. So that one I really like in the fall. So anyways, that's sort of our fall. Take a break, and then we have a race January, February, March, and then April is our big one, and that's usually no more than 50K. So it's anywhere from half marathon to 50K, because really we can't train that well for something that long in the spring because of our lack of our trail access that opens up, pretty late for us. And that was one thing I did learn right away. My first 3 years of coaching, I said, hey, let's do 100 mile, let's do 100K. Let's just go for it. And so we used to go to Javelina. Yeah. We used to go to there's another 100. I'm blanking right now. Arches 100, I think it was. But we used to go to these other big distance events, and these athletes train for them, and then they run them. Either they drop out or they run them and they struggle. And I soon realized that, just sitting down with my assistant coach at the time, saying, hey, these kids are getting burnt out. They're, not interested in running anymore. They're either quitting the team or something else. And so I figured out, hey, we can't do that. That's way too long for 18 to 22-year-olds. We need to dial it back, and we need to, really be specific on who runs what distance and when they run it. So now I have a good program of, if someone wants to do a 50 miler, I make sure, okay, they got to have some experience first. It's not just a kid coming from high school. They're going to jump to a 50 miler. No way. They have to go through the program for a couple of years, get their feet wet in the half marathon and build up appropriately. But my vision afterwards is even if we stop them at 50 mile or the marathon for my 4-year program, then after college, they can use that same resources and tools to do 100 mile, to do 100K. Like I've had athletes contact me a year after, they're on the team and said, I just ran my first 100 miler, I just ran my first 100K or, this 50 miles. So to use that same sort of the tools that you learned within the process of the 4 years really gets me excited on they're at least making this sport, the longevity of it into their sort of lifestyle, which is ultimately the big plan. It's more of a lifestyle thing,
right?
The trail than sort of that road. So pretty cool.
It makes a ton of sense. I mean, and I don't have a significant background in training theory and coaching, but when I look at what comparable athletes are doing just in the standard cross-country indoor track scene, if I understand it correctly, the longest event they're ever going to run is the 10K, which is maybe like 30 to 40 minutes time on feet. And so this is still, even if you're not incorporating like the 100 mile, 100K distance, it's still significant to spend an hour in a race or 2 hours in a race or 3 hours. So like from a developmental standpoint, that seems to check all the boxes in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny because the lifestyle, sort of the naturalized process of trail running and ultra running has always been, okay, and in college, all you do NCAA, right? You do track, you do your cross country. After college, you do your roads. And then after roads, until you get a little older, your 40s or something, then maybe I'll dabble into trail or ultra or mountain, right? And so it's funny when we first started coming to these races 8 years ago, the environment and the energy that all these young next gen kids were bringing to the races were the athletes and the normal people that were there were just sort of like shocked that these young kids were there because they were so used to just the normal, right? The 40-year-olds, the 50-year-olds, I'm 41 years old, but it's like to have the ability to get that next gen in the trail ecosystem or the mountain ultra trail at an early age is amazing for not just them, but for the sport in general. I think that is one way that we need to sort of double down. And that's a way we're just going to build off of that and get those younger kids in there, make it more competitive, make it more fun, enjoyable, and show that it's not just, what's cool about our program is you can work as hard as you want, or you can show up and have work ethic and have their own personal goals too. So there's a lot of athletes that want to be super competitive and to try to go for the win or get a PR. But I have other athletes, which is awesome, that want to finish their first marathon, want to finish their first half marathon, want to finish their first 50K. And that I get just as excited training them and talking to them about to the guys and the girls who want to win, you know what I mean? So to show that level of, diversity is pretty neat for our sport, and to be in that environment. As you know, you've been to a road racing, road race before, and you've been to a trail race before. 9 times out of 10, people will be like, I'd want to go to a trail race before another road race because everyone's so chill and relaxed and helpful and right.
I want to be conscious of your time. I just have a few more questions. You talked about how when you were at Hanson's, resources make such a difference in athlete development and just your entire running career. Can you talk about the unique resources that your team has to improve themselves as athletes, and whether it's from like a training standpoint or travel to races, just what they have at their disposal to use?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's the obvious stuff, right? The coaching, the logistics, the lodging, the food, nutrition. We're partnered up with a hospital that does PT work for them Monday through Friday. So if anything does come up, they have the ability to get in and get stuff worked on, which is nice. And then now recently, the partnership with Adidas Terex helps them with a huge resource of shoes and gear, extra travel money. So giving that extra, not to worry about, I have to spend another $150 to $200 on a training shoe. You remember how it was in college. My first few years, I had guys run with holes in their shoes, and they just duct taped them because they were, they didn't have the money to buy a pair of shoes. So now have them to not worry about the gear, like the shoes and the running vest and the bottles and the shorts and everything else that comes with it, really helps them concentrate on showing up and getting the work done and not really stressing too much about, oh crap, I don't have enough money. I might be injured. I might have, 1,000 miles on this pair of shoes. So that's been a huge, huge help that Terex came in and partnered up with the trail running team. So, and that's really our big sort of resources that the athletes do get. They do have to pay a due. So we charge them $600 to pay a due, but I think that's justifiable on all other attributes and resources that they get with their dues. And that's sort of just a buy-in, commitment sort of thing that we talked about before, which I think is important, right?
You've been in this position for about 8 years now. It seems like you've made a lot of important strides. When you think about the future, what is left to build specifically at this program? Like, what else do you have your eye on in terms of improvement and just build out?
Yeah. When I was on the NCAA, I really tried to hone in on when we got more money, how does that benefit the athletes? And I think the athletes are the most important thing out of any of these programs. They should be anyways. So, and again, I didn't know all of the backgrounds or the details of the NCAA and where that money went, but most of the time the athlete, it was just normal stuff, right? And I could be missing a lot of other components where if money came in from a donor, it's not like the athletes, they were getting, all these other benefits from it. It's just sort of like, it just went into the program and maybe they had some debt to roll up, whatever. But I remember my first year as being trail head coach, I paid attention at every dollar we got from private donors that came in. And if we got more money or more budget, the first thing on my mind was, how can we use this money to benefit the athlete one way or another? To give them an extra race, to give them an extra meal, at a camping trip, or give them, an opportunity to buy some shoes from, a partner with a % off or whatever. So we're constantly thinking about that as money comes in, because the early days, it was all privately funded, our mountain sports program. And that year to year changed on, hey, this person is only given X amount this year, and they gave that amount last year. So that really complicated things on my end on how does the season look. And so now, with the help of Duncan Callahan, really providing the metrics and the stats to the university to buy into and value mountain sports as a recognized program of the university, they are giving a lot more money and paying more attention to us, which helps us so much more to know our exact budget that we have every year. And with that new money, like for example, right when they bought into us, we bought a fleet of vans and a trailer. Instead of using the NCAA vans or the university vans, we bought our own fleet of 5 vans and a trailer that only mountain sport athletes could use. So stuff like that, I think is important to do. The other important thing is what we touched on is the intercollegiate part of it. I think those are whatever, it might be a year to 5 years down the road, but slowly sort of, get that together and hopefully turn it into something that is, viable, where we can hold some sort of intercollegiate system, even if it is 3 or 4 teams at the first year that are buy into it. The next year it could be 5 or 6. The next year it could be 10. So we need to start slowly and just do it, before it's too late, I think.
Right on. One thing I totally forgot to ask this earlier, and I'll be kicking myself if I didn't. You've obviously had 8 years of athletes through the program. Are there any notable alumni that are currently performing at the pro level that you want to give shout outs for?
Well, I told myself I don't want to call any names out, but I will say we do have a few athletes that are sponsored and are really, doubling down on their trail world. And whether or not they, most of them have raised their hand and said, thank you for giving the opportunity to launching, my career to X, Y, Z, which is pretty neat. So yeah, we do have a few that have hit it hard and are on that new level of trail. Other athletes is too, again, I'm not just excited about them. I have other athletes who still I'm really excited about that just contact me, or I find out that they finished their first 100. They finished their first 50. They didn't win, but guess what? They put together a good race plan and they executed it well. So I think that sort of excites me just as much as those pro runners. But yeah, we do. We have 3 or 4 alumni that are kicking butt on the trail scene now.
Very cool. Well, Josh, I think it goes without saying, but I'm so stoked that you're involved in the sport at this level and you're trying to really build something from scratch with this trail running blueprint. I hope that over time, other colleges and people raise their hand and adopt it. We'll make sure to link to all of the relevant social media in the show notes. But are there any specific calls to action that you have for listeners before we go?
Yeah, I will say one quick story. When I was at Flagstaff just this past weekend, I was out there cheering for a runner, and this random runner runs by and he goes, "Hey, you're the head trail coach. I'm excited to hear you on single tracks next week." And I was like, "Oh, cool, right on." I gave him a big high five. Anyways, I just remembered that. So if that guy's out there, it was good seeing you race out there. I'm glad you're listening. But anyways, call to actions. Definitely, let's advocate. There's got to be something alternative to NCAA. It's a great opportunity. Reach out to me. You'll link, my contact stuff. Yep. Reach out to me. Reach out to your athletic department or your university and let them connect with us and get the conversation going, because I think that's what we need to make this thing really, really take off for our next gen. But that's the call to action. You don't have to join my team, but get out there on the trails and enjoy the mountains and share the miles with everyone else.
Well, seriously, thank you so much for your service. I hope that this is the first of many conversations here on the pod, and it's going to be fun to track the evolution of this for years to come. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you, Finn.